on YouTube and Facebook. Tell me when we're live on YouTube, Jimmy. Let's go, shall we? Can you hear me, Jimmy?
Yep.
Are we live on Facebook yet?
You're not live on Facebook yet, you're live on YouTube.
Can you go live on Facebook?
Okay.
And we'll go 10 seconds. Good afternoon. My name's Mick Napier and welcome to one of our current affairs broadcasts, Sunday afternoon, 60 minutes. This week, we're going to look at the news, the grim news from Canada of 1,000 bodies being found in a mass grave in two schools set up for First Nations children. And I believe that's 2 of 230 schools. We don't know what the rest will follow. And we have a very special guest to discuss what's going on there. After that, we'll have Yvonne Ridley talking about parallels and dissimilarities between the events in Afghanistan and in Palestine. Finally, Tony Greenstein's going to come in to discuss the implications, what happened and the implications of a great victory in Manchester against the pro-Israel censorship brigade, who did remove briefly, a statement of solidarity from the exhibition in a Manchester gallery by Forensic Architecture. Following pressure by the excellent people at Forensic Architecture and elsewhere, the statement was restored. But my first guest is Nahla, a professor from Toronto, who is a Palestinian Canadian or a Canadian Palestinian. You can clarify that, Nahla, but she knows what she's talking about when she talks about genocide in Canada, which I believe is now widely accepted as such. And Nahla, can you tell us what happened and why you think it happened?
Okay, let me begin by acknowledging the land I'm sitting on and speaking from. I am speaking from stolen land from the Algonquin as well as the Anishinaabe nations. Now it's called Ottawa. It's not Toronto, by the way, it's Ottawa,
Sorry.
The capital. Now that naming or recognizing the name of the stolen land is extremely important, not only for Indigenous people in Canada, but all Indigenous peoples under settler colonialism, including the Palestinians, for whom over 50 villages and almost all the cities have been wiped out with, Israeli settler colonialism, with the Zionist settler colonialism, let me put it this way, and have really disappeared from the map, and now have been attributed to Jewish property or Jewish appropriation. Jewish as in, Israeli now, claiming Jewish or Hebrew names instead of the original Arabic names. So this is just, a beginning. And this is something that universities, by the way, throughout Canada have begun to use recently. Recently in the past, I would say 3-4 years, and not before that. Only then, that kind of impact of the kind of genocidal practices of the Canadian state, the impact of these genocides have on academia or, academic persons. So in the universities, almost all of us, faculty and administration, now put down under our names or under our signatures, the land, we recognize the land that we're sitting on. So this is, yes, it is symbolic, but it is important. It is important because one of the genocidal tactics or practices of settler colonialism is the elimination of the toponymy of the indigenous place. The toponymy means the names of indigenous places, their displacement and replacement with with the white in the case of North America, or Turtle Island, as it is known by indigenous people, and in Palestine, as we know it, with Israel changing, actually, with the settler colonial and genocidal Israel. This is the way it sort of refers to the land of Palestine, which it claims as it is. Now, you are referring to one out of several processes of the settler colonial nature of the Canadian state, which is the elimination of actually thousands of children from the transitional schools, or the the special schools that they were placed in. And these schools actually were not the school that come to our mind. These are places, literally, where the children were snatched from their mothers, from their parents, from the homes, and taken away by force and placed there in these residential schools, where the kids would stay there all of their lives, basically for the duration of 12, 18, or whatever years. And during that time, which has been going on for 100 years.
And the British were involved in this, Nahla, not just the Canadians, yeah?
Who is?
Were the British involved as well?
Well, the British were involved, the Canadians were involved, and the church was heavily involved. So Christianity has a lot to do with genocide. And now, actually, indigenous people, indigenous communities are asking for the church for, compensation for the losses of lives, and, not just the lives of those who disappeared, but the lives of those who remained and living in trauma, in a huge trauma. So we're talking about thousands of kids buried without the knowledge of their parents. The disappearing as part of the process of genocide is only, one aspect, as I said, of that process. You have also the murder and disappearance of women. Thousands of, indigenous women in Canada have disappeared. And that is not 100 years ago, that is recently, the last, 20, 30 years, ago. And until this moment, no one has any sort of exact knowledge as to what happened to them, who killed them, where did they go, how did they disappear. There was a recent report that came out 2018, 2019 called MMIWG, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in Canada, which literally and emphatically calls Canada as a genocidal state. So that Canada is a genocidal state is not something that is unofficial, or it's not something that is just a scholarly thing, quote unquote. It is rather an act that has happened to the children, to the women, and to so many other indigenous people who have disappeared under the Canadian settler state.
So Nahla, sorry to interrupt you, we have to move on. If the concept of genocide is widely accepted in Canada as having been the fate of the First Nations, how can anyone deny that genocide also takes place in Palestine? Could I bring you over to that, to the underlying drive of both settler colonial states?
Absolutely. While even the Prime Minister himself came out and publicly said that Canada is a genocidal state after the MMIWG report. Now, Canadians have heard it. The question is to what extent they accepted it. That's another thing. And that is, in the eyes of the beholder. We cannot really get that because, the issue died. The report died. That TRC, report before that also died. Many reports come out and, the Canadian officials come out and address it and accept it and agree with it. But as far as the public is concerned, they don't care much. The settler as long as she or he continue to have the blood of the settler in them, they don't care much about the others because the others have been racialized. This is the same situation we have in Palestine, Israel now. Israel is a settler colonial from the very start, from 1917 and probably before that, with the beginning of the Zionist settler colonial movement. Now, your question is why they're not accepting it. To begin with, Palestinian scholars came out to name the actual event, that Israel is settler colonial and has a process of genocide from the beginning until today, until May of this year in Gaza, as we have seen, and it continues. It is constant process of trying to eliminate land and people, and this is what settler colonialism is about, actually. So settler colonialism has been defined according to Raphael Lemkin, the guy who named or coined the term for the United Nations, and this is what the United Nations considers. So now that Israel is settler colonial, there is no doubt. That Israel is genocidal, there is no doubt. Why it's not out clearly like that? Because there have been attempts, so many attempts, including by progressive Israeli Jewish scholars. For example, a scholar that I respect a lot, Ilan Pape, has called it ethnic cleansing. Well, Palestinians are not an ethnicity, I'm sorry. The different Jewish groups who came as settlers are different ethnicities, but Palestinians are indigenous nation. And
have I got it right? Have I got it right, Nahla? The ethnic cleansing appears in the Balkans as actually a euphemism for genocide, exactly, to avoid using the word genocide. So from one to the other is not a great leap, is it?
Well, exactly. No, the question is, ethnic cleansing is not just euphemism. I think it distorts the whole meaning of genocide. When you say genocide, you're talking about all sorts of things, from killing to disappearance to constant intimidation, to constant displace and replace. This is the process that Israel has been doing from the very beginning until now. The map, which I wanted to show the audience here, if you can share if you can share your Zoom with me, I can show you the map that I have here. Okay. As usual, I'm always a bit late with sharing this map. Okay, let me see.
It's the four maps, isn't it, of disappearing?
Yeah, it's just the yeah. Okay, let me see, where did the map go? Okay, anyway, I had to spend time on technology, so I'm not going to do that. Basically, the map I have shows, Palestine before 1948, where it was overwhelmingly Palestinian, and I don't know, where did it go? Do you see it? Do you see the map?
I'm going to show it in a moment.
Okay.
I'll show it.
Okay.
Bear with me a second. And 3, 2, 1. Will this do?
It will do. It is a bit small for the audience, so but I'm sure they see it and they can recognize it. If you look at 1946, which is before what we refer to as Nakba, which is the genocide, yes, this one, 1946, you could see all the green, which is Palestine and Palestinians. And these little dots of white colors are where the Jewish settlements are, or if you want, Zionist settlements. Now, on the second map, now this is 1947. This 1947 is when various actually Zionist groups who were trained and armed by the British colonial government who was there. These people, basically fought against the Palestinians and occupied that large part. If you look at this large white part, you find it that it's in the outland, that is in the sea part, there on the Mediterranean Sea, and you find it here in Tiberias around the water. So this part takes all of part of Sinai, part of Gaza, part of the Egyptian part, and the Palestinians, as you see, the green part here is crammed in between the Zionist settlements. Now, 1949, between 47 and 48, by 49, the Palestinian space in terms of land shrank into this very small piece of land, which is the West Bank and Gaza right there, the West Bank here, and some of the smaller parts of Palestine inside historic Palestine. This is 49. By now, it's not now, it's several years from now, actually, but still, look at what has become of the West Bank, what has become of, Palestinian villages inside Palestine, Israel now, and look at, how Gaza Strip shrank. And that means that, the settler colonial state and society have been able to expand throughout historic Palestine, leaving very little. And that very little is currently actually also disputed, not disputed, but Israel claims that it belongs to the state, it belongs to the army, it belongs to its own institutions, and it attempts to confiscate it. So this is how Palestine disappeared. This is how settler colonialism manifests itself. Now, is it gradually? It is gradual, but not really too gradual. In a very short period of time, they were able to uproot Palestinians, throw them out of Palestine, out of their homes, out of their houses, and re-establish, the Israeli state on their ruins, on their, villages and histories.
Nahla, children were shot in the head last week and other children were killed. There's intense cruelty. Palestinians have to demolish their own homes, and one man on his wedding day. There's terrible cruelty from the settler forces. But we have to go beyond psychology, don't we? We have to look at sociology. What is the drive? Why the intense cruelty, the racism ascending? Can you just make a few remarks about that, Nahla?
Well, the main remark we need here, settler colonialism is racialized and racializing. By that, I mean they come and create the other, namely indigenous people, as a race. When you come and occupy another race, you put that race down and you don't consider it a human being. So it's race as in other. It is, a race that is, different than us. We are the white supremacist nation that came from the West, whether it is, here in Canada, coming mainly from Britain, but also from France, or in, the case of Palestine, the Zionists literally came from Europe, Western and Eastern at the same time. So for them, Palestinians were nothing. They were, animals. They were slaves. They could be anything, but not human beings. So they cared less about their lives. When you shoot a person and step, what happened to the in the case of Blacks or African Americans in the United States as a result of the police treatment. The same damn treatment is, by Israeli police against Palestinians, but the world is not standing up for that. Because there is that imperialist, if you want, colonial, strong relationship between Israel and the West protects Israel. Imperialism protects itself and its agents. And this is why we don't see much fuss around, Israel's cruelty towards, indigenous Palestinians.
Thank you very much, Nahla Abdo. Nahla has written extensively on these topics, very much from a feminist point of view, but with very broad brushstrokes. We have a couple of copies of one of her books, if the camera picks it up, Captive Revolution, and on Palestinian women's anti-colonial struggle inside the prison system. And so a woman is forced to give birth, I think, yesterday or today in that system. It's a very timely book. Nahla Abdo, thanks very much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick, for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me as well.
Our next is Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne came to prominence. She was a journalist on what used to be called Fleet Street. But she came to prominence when I think the Taliban captured her as she was pretending to be an Afghan woman, completely covered in a burqa. I don't think you could walk like an Afghan woman, Yvonne, but she walks very tall on the issue of Palestine as well. She's been involved in Gaza boats. She's been on them. Yvonne Ridley, a huge pleasure. Tara McCarthy is going to pop a few questions to you about similarities and disparities between the news from Afghanistan and Palestine. Over to you, Tara and Yvonne.
Thank you, Mick. Hi there, Yvonne. Thanks for joining me today. Oh, I think you must be on mute.
Yes, that would help, wouldn't it?
That's better. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like there's so many things that we could discuss today, given the breadth of your knowledge and experience, all the years that you've been working in and studying the whole, situation in the Middle East. I mean, it really is quite fascinating when you look into your biog of all the things that you've been involved in. But as Mick said, and because we're quite time limited today, I guess it would be useful to know from your perspective, particularly in terms of Western interference, what are the parallels, do you think, between the situation in Afghanistan at the moment and Palestine?
Well, it's hard to know where to start with Afghanistan as it is with Palestine, because you really need to go way back in previous centuries to find out if there, for a starting point. But one of the things that I think has shown is that when the Taliban were first in power in the 90s, they had been demonized beyond recognition by the Americans, who had been funding them up until the early 90s, when they were part of the Mujahideen, who were fighting the Russian occupation. Then when they took control and the Americans decided to withdraw, walk away, they didn't need to send funds anymore to that region. The Taliban were left pretty much isolated, and then this big demonization process went on, and they retreated, I think, within an Islamic bubble and developed quite a harsh, uncompromising regime. And then, of course, we know what happened after 9/11 and a 20-year war. And what I've been saying in response to that is that the West must not allow the Taliban to become isolated again, and they must reach out to them. And similarly, you look at Hamas, and Hamas has been demonized beyond recognition and isolated. And this is wholly wrong. You have to sit down and talk. And so today in Afghanistan, we've got this Taliban Mark II. Of course, the Western media is at a loss how to deal with it because they've demonized them so much. It's very difficult for them to roll back and say, oh, actually, they're now the good guys. So, you know, but you just have to listen to the words coming out of the Taliban leadership at the moment. You know, they're talking peace, they're talking reconciliation, they're talking forgiveness. And my goodness, they're talking women's rights. You know, who knew? But of course, we need to see if they make good on all the pledges that they've made. And I'm sure that if Hamas was given a similar platform, you would hear very much the same words, because, you know, they are, it's, you know, the Taliban are Afghans, Hamas are Palestinians, and people lose sight of that. They just use these labels and use them in a derogatory way. But Hamas want peace. They want security. They're already way ahead of the Taliban in terms of women's rights. You just have to look at the female politicians that make up the Hamas leadership in Gaza. I've been to Gaza twice now. I've seen them in operation. And the Hamas government that I met in Gaza, there's probably more PhDs in that government or among their officials than anywhere else in the world. You know, these are bright, intelligent people, but, you know, they have been demonized. What surprised me recently was that Tony Blair, and I don't like giving him credit for anything, but I'm not going to be that churlish this time. He did actually turn around and say one of the biggest mistakes that he made was isolating Hamas. And he said, we should not have done that. We should have reached out. And I think that an awful lot can be achieved if the West does open in dialogue with Hamas, just as they're going to have to do now with the Taliban. And so I think that part of the problem are the politicians, as always, but part of the problem is the media. We need to have a grown-up conversation with the media to stop this hysteria and whipping up hate against different groups. And they do it. It's, you know, it's quite obvious. And, you know, you just listen to the language of the media at the moment in the way that they are addressing the Taliban. And of course, this is something that I'm sure they'll have a similar attitude to Hamas. But we can draw parallels between Hamas and the Taliban, and the common theme between both of them is both hate corruption. And they're, you know, in the Middle East, you're surrounded by corruption. Corruption is destroying the Palestinian Authority. And, you know, Mahmoud Abbas is presiding over a very corrupt administration. And similarly, you know, the Taliban have come into power, and it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with the missing billions from their country through corrupt politicians. So, you know, there are lots of similarities, lots of parallels, lots of Western interference and meddling. And I just wish that we had a more mature media to be able to cut through all of this nonsense and be able to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, no, it's interesting what you're saying about the media portrayal, because I've seen a few articles myself in recent days where, you know, it's like Hamas, the Taliban, and then Al Qaeda are all being lumped together and under the broad banner of terrorists, you know, but as if they're all one and the same thing. So what you're saying there about that kind of whipping up that hysteria, I think that certainly seems to have begun again. I mean, there's no doubt, I think, depending on your political persuasion, of course, but that the US and their allies have suffered a humiliating defeat in Afghanistan. I mean, what do you think that means in terms of Israel, and what does that mean for Palestine as well? I mean, do we think there's going to be opportunities for dialogue because of maybe force, and there's going to have to be some dialogue in Afghanistan? Will that maybe transfer, or is it unlikely?
Well, people will draw parallels and say, if we can sit down and talk with the Taliban, why on earth can't Israel sit down and talk with the Palestinians, including Hamas? So I think it is going to be quite an interesting time. Bizarrely enough, I think Israel could be involved in a lot of the undermining and destabilization in Afghanistan. And the reason I say that is that the Taliban have been reaching out to their neighbors. And although they are Sunni Muslims, they've reached out across the sectarian divide to Shia-controlled Iran. And of course, we all know that Iran is holding a shadow war in the Persian Gulf with Israel. Israel is trying to destabilize and undermine the nuclear treaty, which is still teetering on the brink. And so it will not be in Israel's interests for Afghanistan to be a stable country, because if Afghanistan is unstable and continues to be in turmoil, that will cause huge problems across the border with Iran. And Iran has enough problems without trying to, you know, be involved. So these are, there's lots of
ripples.
Yes, that are affecting neighboring countries. Now, going back to the Taliban, they have taken on the biggest superpower in the world and won. And what we're looking at are 75,000 men wearing sandals and a shalwar kameez, you know, the traditional Afghan dress. And I remember interviewing a Russian colonel who had been part of the Russian occupation. And we were talking in advance of the war, so that we were talking just after 9/11, but before I went into Afghanistan. And this Colonel Shestakov, I always remember, I said, what advice would you give to the Americans? He said two things: don't even go in. And he said, the second piece of advice is, if you do go in, forget all your fancy equipment, all your bunker busting bombs, forget all of that. tell your soldiers to take off their boots, put on trainers, and just fill their backpacks full of bullets and go up with machine guns. He said it's the only way that you can fight these people. You can't fight them from thousands of feet in the air, which was really interesting. And then he said, you'll have a great big battle over who takes possession of a cave. And he said, you know, you might win that particular battle. And then he said, you're left with a cave. And what do you do with it? You know, do you stand and guard it? And he just said it was just an impossible place to have a war. And that was, you know, if only they'd listened to Colonel Shestakov, they could have saved themselves all of this problem. But the fact that will rattle Israel as well. Israel's biggest export is its arms, its weapons that it routinely tests out on the Palestinians in Gaza. And of course, the Taliban have shown that you don't need a big army, you don't need masses of weapons to win a war or to defeat an opponent. And when you consider the Taliban got control of the country, there was 75,000 of them. They've been fighting this war for 20 years. They couldn't possibly have advanced without popular support. Even after they were routed from Kabul and fled in October, November 2001, they must have had support on the ground to protect them, to clothe them, to house them, to look after them until they were able to regain in strength, regroup, and fight back. So what this has shown, whether people are like it or not, there is an appetite for their return. And I think that appetite has been brought about because of, one, a brutal American occupation. You know, Bagram is now doesn't have US forces, but if the walls could talk in Bagram, you know, I think there'd be a lot of secrets coming out there. So the brutal occupation of the Americans has provided a groundswell of support for the Taliban, but also the corrupt government has also provided a groundswell of support as well. Now, then there's definitely a brutal occupation in Palestine for sure. And there is also untold corruption there as well, the misuse of funds, the misuse of Western money. And, you know, the Palestinians, 70 odd years on, are still rising, they're still resisting. And I think that what the Taliban have done will actually give encouragement to the Palestinians. And they'll think, you know, if they can do it, maybe we can as well. Because the one thing that the Taliban victory has shown is that might doesn't always work. And well, these...
I'm afraid that's us out of time now. Right. It went really quick, didn't it? But it's been brilliant to get your analysis on the situation, and particularly in parallel to Palestine. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand you back to Mick. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Hi.
Right. Let's now consider the disaster in Afghanistan for the people. The hell of settler colonialism and genocide in Gaza. But let's spend a little bit of time enjoying something. There was a tremendous victory in Manchester a few days ago. The pro-Israel brigade were in, the Lawyers for Israel were charging against an exhibition there, but they were roundly defeated. Allegations of anti-Semitism. Tony Greenstein he's probably been expelled multiple times from the Labour Party. He has a record of challenging Zionism, practically and intellectually, I think without equal. He's going to be talking to Ian MacDonald about what happened in Manchester and the wider implications for rolling back the Zionist witch hunt. Ian, over to you and Tony.
Yeah, okay. Hi, Tony.
Hi.
I had thought I would ask, I had a look in at the Labour Against the Witch Hunt meeting last night, so I thought I'd maybe quiz you just on that first, and we can get to Manchester. But you know that organisation, you're a leading member there, and it is one that is prescribed by the Labour Party now. I mean, you're as Mick said, a victim, or an earlier victim after Corbyn was elected. I mean, there's been prescriptions of 4 groups in the party, local parties suspended, automatic exclusions. I mean, basically, if you try and defend any victim of the witch hunt, you are a victim yourself. I mean, the question I was going to ask you was this. I mean, at this point, 6 years on since 2015 and things kicking off, I mean, what are the key elements for you of fighting back against the witch hunt in the Labour Party? And I mean, do you have an optimistic view over the next year, say, as well as, I would imagine, a pessimistic view of how things are engulfing, you know, the purge?
Well,
so, can you take that?
I'll do my best, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was the first Jewish person to be expelled, the first, but not, of course, the last, because we now know that you are 5 times more likely to be disciplined, expelled if you're Jewish than non-Jewish. That presumably was what Starmer meant when he talked about rooting out anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, Corbyn and those around him, Momentum and so on, never understood the attack that was coming. It was simply that it was as if they loaned out their brains, despite having Seamus Milne, the scion of the ruling class, as his closest advisor. It didn't seem to occur to them that the election of someone who was anti-imperialist, pro-Palestinian, anti-NATO, etc., as leader of the Labour Party, would set off a massive reaction in the ruling class, in the establishment. And we saw that they tried every tactic possible, and they settled on anti-Semitism because it gave them a certain moral fervour, a moral righteousness that no other issue did. I mean, who doesn't want to be against anti-Semitism? And even the Daily Mail, you know, the most racist and right-wing paper you could imagine, was opposed to anti-Semitism. They never seemed to add up that maybe there was something phony about this. You know, John McDonnell was running around like a headless chicken, saying he was tearing his hair out, I remember was one phrase. We had to expel everyone. They never sat down and thought, well, maybe just it has something to do with the fact that whenever anyone opens their mouth about Palestine in Britain, they're accused of anti-Semitism. It's a go-to attack. It's understandable from the Zionist point of view, because how do you defend arresting and imprisoning without charge children as young as 12 on the West Bank, blindfolding, beating, torturing, stealing land? It's far easier to attack your critics as anti-Semites. I mean, it makes sense, but Corbyn basically, I don't want to say he's stupid, but he never got it. I'm not any
Tony, I mean, Tony, could I just sorry interrupting, but I mean, could I ask you, I mean, where you think it's going? I mean, what the fight back, I mean, what do you think is key in the period ahead against the witch hunt that clearly exists? I mean, it's an attack on the left, but it's part of a wider alignment to silence critics of Israel.
Well, yes, but I mean, the problem, and it is a real problem, that still major sections of the left don't understand what's hit them. I mean, Andrew Scattergood, who's chair of Momentum, when Corbyn was suspended, what did he come out with? He said, this undermines the fight against anti-Semitism. I mean, there really is no hope for him. I call him scatterbrain because he seems to have loaned out his brain. He's never thought that maybe the fight against anti-Semitism just had something to do with the fight against Corbyn. So, I mean, they just make no sense. Momentum is completely useless now. It says nothing, it does nothing. The CLPD isn't a great deal better. That was the original organisation of the left around the Benite period. Starmer is using every trick in the book. I mean, democracy has been abolished in the Labour Party. I mean, you raise your head, you discuss something they don't want you to discuss. It's not competent. People are suspended on the most bogus of excuses. I think the Labour left has to draw certain conclusions, and one of those is they have probably lost the battle, if not the war. So you do have to look further afield and reassess your tactics. Of course, that's very difficult for some people, and you know that I spoke to a losing motion last night. It was lost by, 40-31. So clearly there's a lot of support for it, but nonetheless, some people are finding it very difficult to come to terms with what is happening. And that is a tragedy, but it's not unusual.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe broadening it out. I mean, the events at the Whitworth Gallery, I mean, would you comment on those, the lessons for I mean, that is fighting back as well, because we know that there's attempts always by the Zionist groups to intimidate and silence. I mean, what do you think the key issues there were? And I was going to ask, I mean, the body, the organisation that seems to be sort of up front quite often at the moment is UK Lawyers for Israel. I mean, I wonder what you know about them. I mean, they've certainly been contacting all the local authority pension funds about divestment, and there's quite we're seeing them often. I think they got textbooks by Pearson's, the publishers, kind of they got material deleted from those. So just that question, Manchester, the Whitworth Gallery and UK Lawyers for Israel.
Well, can I put it in a context? I think this has been a torrid year for the Zionist supporters outside Israel. First, you had the B'Tselem report saying that Israel was apartheid, and that was about February. Then you had, I think in April, May, you had the Human Rights Watch report, which said virtually the same thing, that Israel is a racist, apartheid, Jewish supremacist state. I think they've lost the narrative, control of the narrative. And you saw that very clearly with the May Gaza attack, where Israel was forced to call it off after 11 days, unlike in 2014. The reaction was so adverse that basically Israel realized that politically it was digging a hole for itself. And I think that was quite unique in many ways, that widely Hamas was seen as having become the victor in that battle. So I think the conversation has changed, and nothing Starmer does or anyone else will alter that fact. In many ways, what I've written is we are seeing the beginning of the end of Zionism. I mean, they may take a long time. It may be a long period. But nonetheless, I think we've crossed one of the barriers, because if you remember, people should put these things in context. When BDS first came on the scene in 2005, the Zionists were thrown, and they had a lot of think tanks, and they drew up, the Reut Institute drew up a report, and they said the main danger we face is delegitimization. Yes, they can criticize us for this or that policy or tactic, but the day they start questioning our right to a Jewish state, a Jewish apartheid state, is the day we face what they call an existential problem. And I think that day has arrived, that people now question. One state is now normative. You know, when I opposed the Oslo Accords in 1993, I and my fellows were a distinct minority. Everyone thought 2 states was on the agenda. 1 state, that's your pipe dream. You can't make Palestinians accept your ideology. They want their own states. Today, everyone realizes what we said was true, that 2 states was never an option because Israel will never give you 2 states. Even if it was wrong in principle, in practice, it simply wasn't on the agenda. So all of those things have come together. And we saw that at the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester. Now, you asked me about UK Lawyers for Israel. It was a far-right group of lawyers. It's headed by Daniel Burke. And who's Daniel Burke? He's a Manchester solicitor who is Tommy Robinson's solicitor, and incidentally, Jonathan Hoffman's solicitor. He's of the far right. He's not the only one. Festenheim is another one. Very nasty far right solicitor. Is it any surprise they invite Regavim, which is a horrible, nasty NGO in Israel, which specializes in ensuring that Palestinian buildings and homes are demolished? They need to be exposed. Likewise, I think the Union of Jewish Students, which isn't this cuddly association of Jewish students, it's the Israeli state on campus. That's the reality. So we have to shine a light on these groups.
Definitely. I mean, I think, you know, it's probably their effort to give credibility as lawyers, you know, so they can sort of, send lawyers' letters to various people. You mentioned the apartheid reports this year as a development. I mean, do you think they're going to gain sufficient traction? Have they got the potential to do that, to shift public opinion, shift opinion of institutions so that they take on board? Yes, we're dealing with an apartheid state, you know, because it would be so important that if, you know, we're not allowed, you're supposedly in the Labour Party not allowed to say Israel's a racist endeavor, but obviously if it's apartheid state, it is a racist endeavor.
But
the IHRA falls apart, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Do you think there's potential that they'll make a difference, these reports?
Yes. I think it's made a major difference, because even 2 or 3 years ago, they could accuse you of anti-Semitism to describe Israel as an apartheid state. That was still beyond the bounds of the permissible. But today, with B'Tselem, the major human rights organization in Israel, respected by everyone, it started out as a liberal Zionist group. It wasn't anti-Zionist. And Human Rights Watch, which is the State Department's favorite human rights group. Are they anti-Semitic? Is everyone anti-Semitic? I mean, you know, it's noticeable that Starmer has kind of forgotten about the anti-Semitism, which it's now quite obvious. You don't agree with me, you're out. So there's that change. But what Manchester showed was they're not invincible. If you have a big enough pushback, and we did, Manchester collapsed like a pack of cards. Remember, Manchester University was the original Zionist university. It was a university where Chaim Weizmann did his research as a chemist, 12, 13, up to the Balfour Declaration. He was based at Manchester. It always had a Zionist coterie. We had was it Marika Sherwood, a Holocaust survivor, give a talk in 2017. Outrageously, they changed the title of her talk. She said, what the Nazis did to me, the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. She was entitled, of all people, to make that point. And yet Mark Regev, an apologist for war crimes, visited Manchester.
Oh, what's happening?
He visited Manchester.
Actually, Tony, I was going to ask, while we've still got time, I mean, Palestine Action, what's happening with somebody's,
I think the stray mic's been left on.
Muted. But yeah, Tony, Palestine Action, I mean, I saw their involvement in this success with Gallery. I mean, I just wanted, maybe it's a final question. I mean, for many people, you know, what they're doing, Palestine Action, has been inspiring and looks effective, you know, particularly the
Absolutely.
occupations of Elbit factories. I think you spent a little time behind bars as part of an involvement, but I mean, can you say a bit of what you feel about the significance of this approach, and why it hasn't, why do you think it's hasn't met with the support of the BNC, you know, and Palestine Solidarity Campaign?
Well, yes, you're right. I was arrested and spent a week on remand in Birmingham prison in March because I went on an action. In fact, we were apprehended before we got to Shenstone, which is the real tragedy of it. But yeah, it's been a breath of fresh air, the actions of Palestine Action, because they've shown that direct action is possible, and it is possible to put the Israeli defense firm or war firm, really, Elbit, on the defensive. They've basically run away from every trial so far. Whether they drop the charges against me and my fellows, I don't know. We wait to see. But I mean, what PSC has done is absolutely disgraceful. They have, they have just told lies about Palestine Action. They provided bogus legal advice that if you give them money, you can be prosecuted. An absolute nonsense, total nonsense. Unfortunately, the BNC has fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. PSC is unfortunately more interested in empire building than actually the Palestine issue when it comes to it. They abstained totally from the anti-Semitism campaign around the Labour Party, with the result of the IHRA gained traction, which it should never have. They allowed Corbyn to go down to defeat because they refused to back people who were under attack when they were anti-Zionists and supporters of the Palestinians. And now they're attacking the most successful direct action group there's ever been. I mean, during the Gaza attack.
Tony, sorry, I'll probably we have to wind up now. I mean, I don't think when introducing you, we should have said that you were behind founding the PSC, but one of its harshest critics.
That's one of its co-founders. Yes. We all make mistakes.
Yeah. Thanks. Anyway, okay. So
thank you.
That's us done.
Thank you.
Right, back to Mick. You there, Mick?
Yes, struggling with technology. Thank you, Tony. And a big thank you to Yvonne and to Nahla, of course, our three guests shining a light on current affairs that we want to shine light on. Friends, the Israelis managed to get a few headshots on children last week. Some of those children have died, trained snipers killing kids at a distance, and you can produce learning academics which will say that talking about the Israelis killing children is anti-Semitic. Look, we're going to broadcast each week. Next week, we are going to look at COP26 in Glasgow in November, when some of the biggest villains on the planet will be gathering to advise us on how to prevent Armageddon. The same people who brought us war and catastrophe. We'll be interviewing Shir Heaver, Israeli economist, who has commented on the Israeli habit of purloining the majority of aid destined for Palestinians. And what triggers that is the atrocious treatment of Mohammed El-Shalabi, a Palestinian aid worker who's been banged up for 5 years, pending trial for fraud. And the reason he's still in prison is he has refused to sign confessions which are simply untrue. So next week, we'll take a look at COP26. We'll take a look at Mohammed El-Shalabi, Palestinian aid and Israel's stealing of it. And what else? We will look at one other burning issue of the day. Friends, where else would you learn, except yesterday on this day, of the Israeli militia who tried to assassinate an American ambassador? Where else would you learn about facts illuminating the nature of Israel, Zionism, and Palestinian resistance. Don't forget, subscribe to On This Day. We'll post the number, but if you want to beat a path to our door, you'll know how to do so. Hampden, Israel plays Scotland on the 9th of October. Scottish PSC is part of a coalition who will be organising a protest at Hampden from 3 o'clock on Saturday, the 9th of October. You will be able to eyeball the Israeli football team as they drive into the stadium and let them know what you think of those men, many of them ex-soldiers who've committed atrocities. Let them know that we don't want an apartheid team coming to play in Scotland. Friends, thanks again. This is Mick Napier on behalf of Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, thanking you for viewing. We very much value your feedback. Get in touch, tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, and tell us what you think we should be covering in the weeks ahead. Mick Napier, on behalf of Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, thank you very much for watching.